And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Rupert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Rupert Pictou. In its fourth year, the colonists reported on the birth of a new city called Victoria. In its ninth year, it commented on the creation of a new country, one called Canada. In its 13th year, it covered British Columbia's move to become a province in Canada. Newspaper carry the news of the world. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 1990.
Residents of Prince Rupert in the early days enjoyed lively competition among up to half a dozen local newspapers. A man named John Houston published the first one, The Empire, in 1907. Houston had also started the first newspapers in several other BC towns, including New Westminster and Nelson. By 1910, the Empire had become a daily paper and was joined by the Optimist, the Journal, and the Daily News. But the competition soon began to focus on just two of those papers. The Daily News bought out the Optimist, and the Journal fell by the wayside around 1916. That left the two dailies battling for readers and advertisers until 1947. Then the Daily News sewed up the market by buying out the Evening Empire. With the exception of a couple of very short-lived weekly newspapers, the Daily News has enjoyed a monopoly since 1947, not an unusual situation in many small Canadian cities. But late last year, that began to change. The publisher of the Yellowhead Herald, which serves Hazelton and points north, decided to expand to the coast. The result was the Weekly Star.
Well, the Prince Rupert market really was a market that was waiting for something to come along. When we went in there at that time, there was the daily only, and any marketplace is stimulated by competition. I think that's a good thing, and I saw that not only could the weekly be strong, but also so could a daily. And they both service a different type of market. They both provide a different type of service. We covered an area broader than the daily covered. The daily served its purpose, we served ours. And so we felt that it was a marketplace that was really ready for us.
Brown entered the Prince Rupert market with a small team, just 3 employees in an office in the Pride of the North Mall. Reporter Brenda Halleck left the Daily News for the new challenge.
I see the Weekly Star as a kind of a trailblazing paper where we're looking for stories that aren't normally covered. And I've been in the community for nearly 4 years, and I have a feel for things that are shaping up. And I like to find those things and give people who normally don't have access to the media, to give them a chance to reach the media. And I think it's an exciting time for publishing in Prince Rupert. I think the community is getting pretty good coverage from all different angles.
The Weekly Star averages just a dozen pages and appears each Wednesday. Along with the reporter, the paper employs an advertising salesperson and a clerk. The rest of the staff is shared with Brown's other paper.
All the paste up is done in a central shop in Hazelton. We have both the Herald and the Star are laid out. One production crew which puts out both papers. As far as printing is concerned, we print with Northern Sentinel Press in Kitimat. And our relationship with that company goes back a few years to back in the 70s when I was general manager of that company. So we have a good working relationship with them.
With only one newspaper in Prince Rupert so long, it's not surprising a number of entrepreneurs would consider jumping into the gap. In fact, while John Brown was getting ready to publish the Weekly Star, Leslie Yates, a partner and design firm, was doing some planning of his own. The sudden appearance of the Weekly Star made him think twice about launching Prince Rupert this week.
It came as a surprise to me, more than a surprise, it was a shock to see another weekly newspaper had started up. So I wasn't that committed financially and otherwise at that point, and actually put it on hold until I saw what was going to happen with that newspaper. And so I waited for a month or 6 weeks and watched it, and I said to myself that I didn't think that this product was what I envisioned and not what I envisioned succeeding in the Prince Rupert marketplace. So I continued on, and as you can see now, they are two vastly different products, and I guess time will tell. You know.
What is your basic vision for Prince Rupert this week?
Well, my vision was something that would be a supplement to the existing newspaper, that we could put out a weekly newspaper on a Sunday, a day that they don't publish on, a publication that would carry almost exclusively local news, commentary, and features. That would be a supplement to the existing paper, and that people would enjoy reading on a Sunday. And I thought that because Sunday shopping is growing everywhere in the Northwest, that this paper may offer a product to advertisers that they would find useful. And so far, that seems to be the case.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thanks for staying with us. The front page, a metro section, and a sports page typically are the only parts of a paper that staff is working on up until deadline. Feature pages, opinion pages, and the bulk of larger Sunday editions are often working on content days or even weeks ahead of time. Let us return to the archives to learn what is in Prince Rupert's this week's paper.
The first edition of Prince Rupert this week was published in March. It's a Sunday paper with 28 pages plus a real estate section. 6 full-time and 2 part-time employees put it together in an office in Prince Rupert's Cow Bay area. Jerry Dieter heads up the paper's editorial department. Dieter moved to Prince Rupert from Kitimat, where he'd been editor of Alcan's company newspaper, The Ingot. He's had to make some adjustments for the new job.
Layout, of course, is very different. With The Ingot, of course, I had a full page that I could just do with do anything with that I wanted to, whereas now I'm working around advertising, and that's been quite a learning experience, as they say. Beyond that, I always enjoyed a fair amount of freedom at The Ingot, and that's something I still enjoy. My publisher gives me as much leeway as I need to do the job that I'm doing. The only difference, I'd say, is that at The Ingot I served 2 masters, basically, my employer and my reader. Here I have to serve a great many masters, again with the advertisers, and a much more diverse readership than we had before. But it's challenging. After 9 years at The Ingot, I really welcomed a challenge, and this has certainly been that.
Dieter agrees the role of a weekly paper is different from that of a daily.
Well, to begin with, I grew up in big cities, and I grew up with the tradition of the Sunday morning newspaper. And to me, there is nothing in the world that can replace the Sunday morning newspaper. You get up on a Sunday morning, you have a leisurely breakfast, and you spend an hour or a couple of hours reading stories, features, things that can be covered by a weekly newspaper in depth that a daily newspaper just doesn't have the time to do. There's an entertainment factor involved that I think is very important.
In addition to Dieter and reporter Lolly Kaiser, Prince Rupert this week has gathered an impressive list of columnists who add to the entertainment factor. Many are longtime Prince Rupert residents, well known for their involvement in the areas they now write about. Those topics range from the waterfront to recycling. One contributor is a former editor of the Daily News. Many readers of Prince Rupert this week are impressed with the look of the paper. Computer technology is partly responsible.
With the technology that is available, we're pushing it to the limit, I think, with respect to, and it mostly is involved in the advertising and the advertising design, where we're creating the basic elements, the creative elements of the ads on a computer screen and printing them out typeset or camera ready. Rather than putting, the traditional way is to put the pieces of type together in an ad. We're combining all the pieces of type on a computer screen and printing them out as one complete unit. And it's an evolution of the desktop publishing.
Essentially, the computer allows Yates staff to be more creative in less time. The final camera-ready flats composed of ads and editorial copy are then sent to Terrace for printing. Competition can get nasty when 2 or more newspapers begin to woo the same advertisers and readers. In Terrace, accusations of unfair price cutting and calls for loyalty to a hometown product flew when the Caribou Press chain entered the market with the Terrace Standard. But all 3 papers have survived, and consumers are enjoying the higher quality products the competition has generated. In Prince Rupert, accusations of unfair competition haven't emerged, but still the new environment has sparked some changes.
The Daily News has more, I think it's a result of us coming along, has more people working in their newsroom than they in terms of the total numbers, than they have in the last 5 years. So on the editorial side, I think we have made a difference to the amount of locally generated content in the Daily News, and we anticipated that was an area that they could improve on and probably would improve on as a result of there being competition in the market. So from the public's point of view, I think that competition is leading to 2 better newspapers.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Corner offices are meant to convey hierarchical prestige and status. The cubicle was intended to improve employees' lives, but ultimately became the symbol of corporate drudgery. Let us return to the archives to discover other difficulties employers face keeping staff.
Editorial staff, I think in most newspapers, are transient people. And I can't, sometimes they come, they don't like the weather, they don't like this, that, and the other. I can't govern that, you know, one way or the other.
But it definitely makes a difference to the product. I guess that must be a problem at times.
Yes, there's times when, you know, it's hard to get all the local news with a short staff.
The pages of the Daily News now show the effect of a larger editorial department. They contain more local stories on a regular basis than they have in a long time. But the publisher is reluctant to say it's the competition that's made the difference.
Well, long before the advent of these other 2 papers, it has been our intention to cram our paper right from the front page right to the back with local news. And to that end, we've increased the staff in editorial and by 1 extra person.
Does the advent of those papers make it even more important that you do that now?
Yes, I believe so. Yes, but it has always been our intention, you know, to cram it right through, from back to front with local news.
Some of the changes at the Daily News can also be attributed to a new editor. Like Jerry Dieter at Prince Rupert this week, Dan Gilmore has come from Kitimat, where he worked for the News Advertiser.
Now we've got an editorial staff of 5, including me. Phyllis Bowman, of course, knows the community like nobody else. And I'm just really trying to apply what I learned in Kitimat, working on a community paper where we did not run wire, we did not run anything that didn't have to do with Kitimat or Terrace, unless it had a province-wide appeal, and it usually originated out of that town anyway. And that's what I would like to do now. Obviously, Monday is usually a slow day. Tuesday following council, we've got a lot of local. Our last Friday edition, everything turned out well. We had almost all local, page 1 and 3. And that's exactly what my goal is to get all the local that we can.
Gilmore agrees the job of a daily paper differs from that of a weekly.
Well, being a daily, we publish 5 days a week. We like to provide all the news that we can on a daily basis. That includes city council, school board, pulp mill spills, what have you. Get that out as soon as possible. And once we've accomplished that mission, then we like to get under the fabric and find out what's going on in town other than hard news. There's a lot of soft news, and there's features, service groups, clubs, various organizations. And Weekly, on the other hand, has time to look over those pieces and decide which ones they want to extrapolate on, if they want to find a new angle or provide a little more detail for the people. That's the difference.
So will all 3 papers survive? Those involved have different opinions. The editor and the publisher of the Daily News may be watching the weeklies, but their paper is firmly established. They're carefully diplomatic about the 2 weeklies.
I know John Brown, who owns the Weekly Star, and he's certainly a good businessman and has his plans. It's hard to say. It depends on how much revenue the Weekly Star needs to survive. Prince Rupert this week I don't see going away. There's some really good people behind that, and I would be I'd be very surprised if they folded, and I don't think anybody expects that's going to happen. I think there's room for, I would say, all three. There's definitely room for the Daily News and Prince Rupert This Week and the Weekly Star.
For his part, Leslie Yates doesn't feel threatened by the Star.
My own belief is that the Star isn't making a difference to us with respect to advertising or with respect to editorial. The feedback that we're getting from the public is that if they're going to talk and compare newspapers in Prince Rupert, it's the Star, or not the Star, the Daily News and Prince Rupert This Week. I mean, I'm not trying to belittle the competition or anything like that. I'm just saying it doesn't seem to be a factor at the moment. So, and I think the product demonstrates it.
Do you think all three papers can survive?
Well, I never believed that. I figured that to have one weekly newspaper survive in this market against a daily would be a fairly large undertaking. And I've always believed that if the product was right, that it could. And I think that the product that we're putting out is right. But I've never believed that unless it was the right product, that anybody could compete successfully against the Daily News. And to say that the two others can compete successfully against the Daily News, I don't think so. Yeah.
But you're hoping that you'll be the one that will survive, obviously?
Well, the startup of weekly newspapers, historically, no matter what the community, they don't have a very good track record. But I think that if you look at the papers that we have been put out, it's been fairly well received by the advertisers. The feedback that we're getting from the public, for the most part, is extremely positive. And so I think we're doing something right. And I think that we can survive in this marketplace, and I think the Daily can survive in this marketplace.
If the Weekly Star is the underdog, its publisher isn't showing signs of intimidation, although he was recently seeking more staff to bolster the operation of both his papers. In promoting his paper, Brown points to its wider distribution and advertising opportunities throughout the Northwest.
We're getting good comments from the readers, good response from the readers. The letters to the editor section is growing. Yeah, it's a good response. It's a good response. We went in with a small team into Prince Rupert on purpose, rather than going in with a big massive team. We went in with local people, training local people, and yeah, basically we'll just keep doing our job. We all service different markets. We handle, I guess right now we're handling the broadest market. We cover, as I say, the entire area, the Charlottes and that included. There is more than enough room for all three publications to exist.
Starting up a new newspaper is always a risk. In Prince Rupert, the Daily News may be competing less directly with the new weeklies, but it's still taking notice, and it's looking better itself. Between the weeklies, the competition is more direct. Whether each can find a comfortable market of its own to sustain it will be determined in time.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Eelgrass is often mistaken for a seaweed, but it's actually a flowering aquatic plant. The combination of fresh and salt water, sediment, light, and organisms interact to form a unique and biodiverse system. It is estimated that over 80% of commercial fish and shellfish species depend on eelgrass habitat at some point in their life cycle. In this final segment of Open Connection, we return to the archives to bring you this story from 1990.
In order to benefit from its new terminal, the Prince Rupert Port Corporation had to first strike an agreement with the Department of Fisheries. In accordance with the DFO's no net loss policy for wildlife habitat, the port was required to create a new area of eelgrass twice the size of the original.
We then looked at a little more closely at the area that was going to be filled in over, and felt that it could be compensated for, and that the impacts would not be too severe, and that there was the technology available to undertake this transplant. So there was quite a bit of ecological sampling done by the port and the port's consultants, and over the past couple of years, we've come to an agreement with respect to the criteria for transplant, area to be planted, techniques, a monitoring program over the next 3 years. It's making a very good project. I feel very positive about it, and the port, very pleased to see them feeling very excited and positive about it as well. A lot of different species utilize eelgrass, many commercial species. It's used very extensively by rearing juvenile salmon once they've exited the Skeena and other local watersheds. Spend varying degrees of time rearing in that area, feeding in that area. Herring as well, juvenile herring rear in the area. Herring are known to spawn on eelgrass as well, so it's a value to the adults as well. Somewhat more importantly, it's a very critical habitat in terms of the lower down in the food chain. It stabilizes these sediments, which creates a stable environment, much the way grass in a terrestrial environment stabilizes soils. The eelgrass stabilizes sediment in the marine environment, enabling a fairly rich and diverse community of bottom-dwelling organisms to reside there.
Well, this is actually called eelgrass. It's not really a grass. It belongs to a different family of plants than grasses. But as you can see, it has the appearance of grass, so most people refer to it as grass. This is what we're basically transplanting. And the shoots, as you can see, are the green leafy material on top, and then the roots and rhizomes on the bottom. These parts here that are called rhizomes are actually underground stems, and they grow in a very dense matrix in the sand. And with those stems and the roots, they just hold and bind the sediment in a very fierce way, so that any kind of erosion is almost impossible on sites like that. So once this vegetation gets established, the site becomes very stable. It then in turn begins to collect mud and sediment, and it turns into a very, very productive habitat for fish and invertebrates and crustaceans. The other thing that eelgrass provides is a lot of structure for marine organisms to live on. Marine organisms are always looking for a place to find a home. So if you have what's once a bare, sandy area colonized by eelgrass, you have huge surface area for the attachment of small crustaceans and invertebrates, as you can see here, and other plants growing on plants. So it provides a very structured habitat once these plants become established.
The project, estimated to cost over $50,000, didn't involve high technology.
At the donor site, we have screens, and we dig up the eelgrass, place the eelgrass in the mud on the screens. Then we use water that are the water supplied from pumps to wash the dirt from the eelgrass, leaving us just rhizomes. These rhizomes are left on the screen clean. Then we then pick them up and put them inside of bags, which then we can then transport over to the receptor site. Planting itself is done with a different crew, and the area has been laid out on a grid. What we do is work the grid and do a different pattern.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Rupert Pictou.